This is a That's It, That's All bonus. A conversation with the man who inspired the podcast, my dad. Eulogio Gumataotao is our first guest. He's got plenty to say and he is insightful. You are listening to That's It, That's All bonus.
You are listening to That's It, That's All with Shawn Gumataotao.
You are in the right place. That's It, That's All with me, Shawn Gumataotao. The podcast is brought to you by our friends at Get LLC. Get LLC is a consulting and specialty construction materials and supplies firm in Micronesia. Do you need video production services? What are the best energy-efficient upgrades for your commercial facility? Get LLC can help answer those questions and many others. You can find them on the World Wide Web at get-guam.com. Please check them out today. Hello to those listeners checking out the podcast in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Also, greetings to those of you listening in Ventura, California. With each episode, the listenership is growing to include those now listening in Portland, Oregon. Can't forget the listeners across my home island, especially those down the road in Umatic. Hafa day to you all. That's It, That's All has a very simple format. The podcast is designed to keep you company as you go from one end of Paradise, Guam to the other. Remember to download the podcast as you cozy up to your desktop or laptop computers, that next gym workout, or just ahead of your next road trip. Thank you to our friends at redcircle.com in pushing out the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Amazon Music. Also, you can find That's It, That's All on iHeartRadio, the iHeartRadio app, and Pandora. Like, subscribe, or follow the podcast right now on your favorite podcast app. Click those buttons right now. A very special bonus. Eulogio Gumataotao, my dad, a Vietnam veteran, a longtime engineer in the cable industry, and resident of San Leandro, California since 1973. He stays up on the issues and is a fan of sports, especially NASCAR. We talk story and hope you enjoy it. Let me just start first. The whole title of the podcast is That's It, That's All. Where in the heck did you get that saying?
That came about late in the late 70s
Okay.
when I'm trying to motivate some of the 45 people, about 70% of the 45 people that I was responsible for.
Okay, so for the record, you spent a very long career in an industry that today continues to push out some of the most cutting edge technology, right?
That's correct.
Go ahead and say it. Where did you come from? What's the technology, and what is the career you were doing?
In cable television industry.
Thank God. See, I was on air, and we had a lot of talk and craziness over the difference between on air and cable. So thank you for being free, Dad. So anyhow, So all those people, and then to motivate them, but did you know you were also motivating your sons and your nephews and your nieces? Because they'll tell you right now that saying kind of crossed all areas.
Well, I've been accused that my thought process, there's no gray area, it's black and white.
Okay.
So that's where that comment came from. Actually, there's an end to that, and let me just say the end.
Okay, go ahead.
Because that's it, that's all, end of story.
Okay, now see, the reason why we can't put end of story on the end of this, that means the podcast title will be too long.
Okay.
So we're gonna. It's either it's either the end. That's the end of the story, or with Shawn Gumataotao. And I tell you right now, I think I need to tell him who's on the podcast.
Okay.
You're not gonna say anything here. Okay, I got you. So Dad, let's talk about the I guess first, the podcast is doing well, and thank you very much for the inspiration. So when we think of, in our house, you just read the newspaper, and we watched the news. I think I blame you and Mom for watching all this news stuff. So how important is it to understand what's happening in the world today by reading and watching the newscasts?
What you do is it motivates you to learn what's happening around you.
Yeah.
First of all, the learning process, and then just being able to disseminate the information. Also, keeps you motivated and keeps your thought process going.
Yeah.
I've been retired for 12 years, and what I need to do is continue to, what do you call that? I'm supposed to be spontaneous, am I correct?
Sort of. You're doing a good job. What are you talking about? You're doing good.
I'm so accustomed to using the 3-word liners. The fact that that's it, that's all is utilized. I mean, it's actually the best saying that I've got is to ensure that you get your shorts off your head.
Oh, okay. Now, I didn't think I was going to hear that on the podcast, but I guess we might as well share that one too. So every time we were either just trying to get a task done and we weren't going fast enough, or we just did it lousily, then that would come up. Thank you very much, Dad. Appreciate it.
And that's the that's not a vulgar statement.
No,
by the way.
no offense taken. I knew what that meant. I meant I wasn't doing it right. So, so if you're 45 staff that worked for you across this entire East Bay, if they hearing this podcast, now we know that we got it from you guys because it carried over to the house, by the way.
And I'm certain
I
whoever
guess.
listens to that podcast would figure out what 30 or 40 years ago I was trying to get across to them.
Yeah, of
And
course.
there's a bunch of, and especially those 45 people who were extremely intelligent people. They were just not motivated properly.
Hey, so when we think about motivation in an industry that today has exploded, when you look at back at it at all those years, do you think that could you have ever imagined that the industry would be where it is at today?
I thought it would evolve. I didn't think it would evolve as rapidly as it is now.
Sure.
As a matter of fact, one of the reasons why I got out of the industry is I was required to look at the gray areas versus black and white.
So gray. So all of a sudden, the evolution of the corporate America decides to go gray.
That's correct.
But that's okay. I mean, but you're an engineer, and by trade, you did this job for many moons. But the evolution, when you turn on the TV now, or using of a cable system now, there's a lot of great advances that you and your team did over the course of almost 30 years.
That's correct. The nice thing about it, everything is these days computerized.
Right.
We envisioned back then, that was probably 30 years ago.
Sure.
People, like I said, what people were doing is they were looking for automation.
Okay.
And our big bosses there, one of the biggest things that they wanted was point and click.
Oh, wow.
And that's what motivated the industry now, because that's precisely what you do with your remotes or whatever devices you have on hand.
All right.
You point and click. You point and talk into it. Click, and you're there.
Hey, let me ask you, when you think about the engineering teams from these organizations like the one you were at, were those engineering teams small or big? I mean, at the time when you started.
They were extremely small. What we devised there in the mid-'80s was the geographical setup for the way we address the devices. They're global.
Right.
You've got Eastern time, mid time, and then also Pacific time. So everybody, I'm sure there's a lot of people that have actually heard about the hits Hidden in the Sky.
Yeah.
That was put together back in the mid-'80s. That is still consistent because all the other services, your satellite services, are hooked onto that Hidden in the Sky. It's multifunctional. As a matter of fact, when you think about this, let me just go off on a tangent here.
Sure.
Your cooking channel.
Yep.
There's only one place in Denver that everybody goes to, and they've got a warehouse, and you've got 25 sets, with each set doing their cooking.
Gotcha.
But yeah, whatever type of
Meal.
but it's all in one confined warehouse, so everything is linked and distributed off this one particular area.
So all the signals from all those studios will go into a head end somewhere for that network, pumps up into the sky, into the space that we know, into that satellite to be distributed to systems all across the country, right, and the world.
That is correct.
So let me, that's why I asked. There was such a small amount of engineers. Could you guys ever imagine? Because I remember we talked about this before. We were growing up, and he would say, "Hey, maybe one day there'll be video games on the cable." And I thought I didn't say it, you did, and I thought it was far fetched. But who would have thought that in the year 2021, video games and other things now, news, you can get almost any news, any part of the world. Because remember, I grew up watching wrestling on Turner's initial WTBS, one of the very first stations to go very, very national, right?
Yeah, all these things that happen there basically was planned for what we call impulse pay-per-view.
Yeah.
Right now, I mean, it's with Touchstone. You get what you want immediately. I know the programming services are unique, and that obviously you have to make purchases. However, you can dial up and say, well, okay, what did I want to see in 1952 that Alan Ladd, Baba this program, and you go and order that piece, you get it instantly. So that's the evolution process. You get to watch what you want when you want, and that is available at this point in time.
This podcast is sponsored by Get LLC, a consulting and specialty construction materials and supplies firm. Since 2012, they have provided valuable services to their customers across Micronesia and North America. Check them out on the World Wide Web at get-guam.com. They have a presence on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram too. Get LLC. Find out today how they can best serve your business's specific needs.
All right, Dad. So when we think about stuff like this podcast, who would have thought that you'd be listening to podcasts and different things? I know you're into a lot of the different types of talk radio, right? And the difference between podcast, talk radio. Do you think is there any one particular, I guess, influencer that you like to listen
to? Michael Savage.
So if you're listening to this podcast, my dad, who lives in San Leandro, California, is a big fan. What do you like about Mike Savage?
He's down to earth.
Ah, okay.
Down to earth. I guess he's down to earth and really serious. You don't see that after Rush Limbaugh.
Oh, yeah.
I guess Mike Savage is the only one that's out there right now that's even close.
Yeah.
And the formatting. He's also on podcast. He's off talk radio. That dropped off in January of 2021. But he's down to earth, and you learn. And he's really nice thing about that. He'll discuss different issues. He's not a news kind of person.
Mm-hmm.
He's
opinion.
He's an opinion person.
Oh, gotcha. You know what's interesting? This podcast tries to do both, so I get the big chance to do the, go back to my roots in television news, right, and then go backwards. But the great part is I have plenty of experience to do the opinion part. So I think that's one of the most valuable things, and I think people listening will agree that it's kind of a good part. Sometimes we don't get a chance to see that in a lot of programs today, and Mike Savage is just one of many across the country that are doing that same thing, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So let me ask you this also. You're also a big fan of NASCAR, right?
That's correct.
So I know that the pandemic did not shut NASCAR down as much as people would have wanted, because you can get in a car, drive around circles for hundreds of miles and doing all that stuff. Well, what's your take on the current NASCAR today? Because I know that you're a big fan, and I know that they're listening to this gratuitous plug. Hopefully they'll sponsor this podcast. But anyhow, the idea is that NASCAR is a fun part for you to get to enjoy the cars. What do you love about NASCAR?
Kyle Busch.
Oh, man, you're going to the drivers, right to the driver.
Yeah, he's a bad boy. Everybody dislikes Kyle Busch.
right?
I think I'm the only Kyle Busch fan.
In the country, there's a lot of Kyle Busch fans in the country.
Well, they love to see him
Lose?
lose. I love to see him win.
Hey, man, there's a lot of good things about that, being the underdog, right?
Yes.
Now, but I know that you either watch it on TV or you're on your computer. It must be pretty trippy to watch NASCAR at almost at any time you want. So, do you watch it all the time right now if you can?
When
races?
possible, I do. The new thing now is there are a lot of young generation drivers. They're actually very good.
Sure.
Um,
Is there anyone that jumps out at you that you like?
Actually, there's 3 drivers that I follow.
Okay, give me at least one.
Well, that's Kyle Busch,
Oh.
obviously, and then there's Joe Logano
Okay.
and Eric Jones.
Okay, now if you put the 3 head to head, put them on, let's say Daytona. Those 3 drivers.
I still pick Kyle.
Do you like the other 2, but there's one that you'll like better, right?
That's correct.
Sounds about right. Okay. No, and it's interesting because I know that growing up in this house, you used to do a lot of wrenching, and I know you spent time going to some of the different tracks because even when I went to Bakersfield, when I was working at the KGET and over at KBAK at the time, it was pretty fun to go and watch either Top Fuel, those little half-mile oval. I used to enjoy that. Is the thrill, I guess, of the race. But for you, is there one race that you spend a lot of time reading up, the newspaper, getting ready? Is there one race that jumps out at you as being a very exciting time for you as a race fan?
Well, the Daytona is a Super Bowl for NASCAR.
Even in the point system now, it still doesn't deter you?
No.
Not at all, right?
I kind of like the new formatting.
Yeah?
You get 16 drivers out there, and then you start peeling off, each after each
race.
After each race.
And they have to qualify to get into the big race.
Yes, you qualify by winning first of all, and then you get points. I'm not going to go into the point scheme of driving carry.
No, the point system when they did it for NASCAR, it was. I'm not saying it's bad, right? But it did make it a little bit more challenging, even for fans. It's not the most what do you call that? At times relatable.
That's correct.
Scale. It's kind of tough for fans.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
This podcast is sponsored by Get LLC, a consulting and specialty construction materials and supplies firm. Since 2012, they have provided valuable services to their customers across Micronesia and North America. Check them out on the World Wide Web at get-guam.com. They have a presence on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram too. Get LLC. Find out today how they can best serve your business's specific needs.
My understanding is you and Mom spend your time. You guys know what's going on in Guam right now, right? You pretty much watch the news or you listen to it, do what you got to do.
We try and keep on top of things like looking at PDN and
Post
and the Guam Post.
Yeah.
We do get a lot of information there.
Okay.
Fortunately.
Yeah.
This thing that the latest is the Afghans, 70,000 Afghans.
Oh yeah, no, that's a crazy thought to bring those people in. But it's interesting.
We've got to park those people somewhere, and we did it for 100,000 Vietnamese. Then they had the Kurds from Iraq.
Dude, are you coming off the cuff with this? Where's your paper at? I'm not even looking at the web right now, and this guy is popping off the information. No, but you're right. I was covering the news at the time when the Kurds came, so it was a little bit very different.
Yeah, the Kurds there was only about 8,000 or 10,000 of those guys.
Very small.
Talking about 70,000 Afghans, and that needs to happen. And as they're telling folks that we're leaving in September,
right?
They should have already left there last month and started to ferry them into Guam. What's happening there? There's a lot of money there, folks. The federal government is going to pay Guam X dollars.
Yes, they will. to host.
to get the 70,000.
And to host, right.
Yeah, to host.
But the only problem is, as you know, that it seems it was media reports that were driving it because the visa process to get out is a very extremely long process. And I think that's the fear of the administration is that
They
they're
can
not gonna
do
get
that.
out
They
in time.
can do
Yeah,
that.
no,
They
yeah.
just-
You know, it's interesting that you say that because they could, but they put their mind to it. They can definitely pull people out of that place.
Oh, you've got the Seabees in Guam. Those guys can put up tents faster than
Yeah,
that's
no,
right.
you're right. I don't think that anyone
And
can
they've got
doubt that part.
they do have a lot. They do have enough property at Anderson Air Force Base there to house 70,000.
Well, I hope they have enough to house
yeah.
70,000.
Oh yes.
And so, but when you look at that whole issue, getting them just part of the way, that they're not going to just stay. They are going to jump into America.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, like I said, then they'll ferry them out, not all at once.
Right.
It's just like what they did with the Vietnamese.
Right.
But again, 70,000. They should have been started the move in May because if we're getting out of there in September, as the president said, the people that are going to be or that will be staying behind, well, you kind of feel sorry for them.
You do.
Because I'm sure the Taliban's going to take care of that.
Yeah. And when we think about the community's impact, so I mean, our community's got to deal with COVID still. We're trying to reopen, all that kind of stuff. And as you're reading about what that's happening there and here, we're doing pretty good with vaccinations right now with COVID.
Guam's doing an excellent job, I think.
Yeah, doing our best at least, right?
Matter of fact, I think a couple of days ago, we had X test, almost 2,000. Out of that, there's only like 20.
Yeah, we're testing way below the number. I mean, but the vaccinations kind of dipping off. Dad, I was just before we jumped on this recording, it looked like the governor is offering incentives now, trying to get folks to actually. It's a trippy thing because as a business owner now, the only incentive I want is to reopen. So I'm not a big fan of let me give you a $10
I
gift certificate.
totally disagree with incentives.
Yeah, me too.
Well, are you gonna pay somebody X dollars to
get a shot?
Yeah, to get a shot. This is a no-brainer.
Yeah, see, a lot of the no-brainer part is probably as the best way to describe the handling of situations like this, and not
Again,
just Guam, but all the territories and the like.
You should not incentivize people that like I said, will help the people that want to help themselves.
Right.
I'm sorry to say, but I don't want to help anybody that's just out there being negative or trying to undermine the process.
But that process is pretty much, or at least that mindset is prevalent not just in Guam, but all across the U.S. territories and across the states. Your state, California,
Absolutely.
too.
Well, here a couple of days ago, prisoner in India did not want to. They're supposed to release him, but he didn't want to get released from jail because he's afraid to go out and downtown. People are dying.
Oh, my
so
goodness.
He'd rather stay in jail. That way he's safer. You go figure.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can't say prisoners aren't stupid because at least they know the lay of the land. What's more dangerous, getting 3 squares in a place where I know I'm going to be safe from a global pandemic and then jump into society. And in India's case, which, it's a big segue from U.S. to India, but India, they're having a hard time keeping up. There's not enough oxygen. There's not enough materials. And with the most populous country in the world, there's no way they can
2 billion
tip it down.
people. How do you accommodate
I don't know.
that?
But at least in your case, when you're listening to this, it's still got to scratch your head, right?
Yeah, it
blows my mind.
What I'm thinking is, why are we giving people 2 vaccines, whatever that may be? Give them one.
Right.
So one is better than none. I mean, all that vaccine does for you is ensures that you'll not die. Does not mean that you're not going to catch it.
Right. It's interesting you say that because you have a mark, and Mom and all of our family that are of your age. You're on your right or your left arm. You guys have that little mark.
Yes.
And so even in Guam back in the 50s, having to get vaccinated at that time, if you compare the two, they're not much different, are they?
No.
The process with the smallpox and COVID-19.
Smallpox, if you were vaccinated back in those days, you got a mark of 4 in your left arm.
Right.
And if you were vaccinated with the other up-and-comer, you got one.
Ah.
But see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Versus doing 4, you do 1, let's go on.
Right. And life kind of just pushed on after you got your shot, right? So, I mean, that's one of the things I think people, as they're listening to this podcast, thinking about, oh, well, if I get vaccinated or not, just think about it wasn't that long ago in the 1950s, well, at least in our American community, doing such a thing to counteract smallpox. This can't be any different.
No.
And it shouldn't be, right?
It should not be. But again, you're getting back to this India thing.
Yeah.
This does not need to be rocket science.
Right.
Give them 1/2.
Right.
1/2 of that vaccination is better than 0. So you take the other half and give it to you got 1 billion people out there.
Yeah, you know, Dad, I've been watching the studies in Israel relative to the Pfizer vaccine. And if people listen to this podcast, if you want to understand more about how an entire country is taking a single vaccine like the Pfizer vaccine and the effectiveness, you got to read some of those stories. There are actually some of the articles, the peer reviews that are done on what's happening in Israel is an absolute example for the world to follow. And I think they did it on purpose. To be able to help share that knowledge. And if they take it to India, like in the one place that Trish and I we like to go and visit, the Philippines, that, you know, they can't keep up with the vaccine or what's happening with the pandemic. I mean, people are just dying on the streets because they just don't have enough care. And it's a very populated part of Southeast Asia.
Again, we look at it. I mean, there is a solution.
Sure.
These people they refuse to look at the solutions or even figure it out.
Is it better to be in crisis, you're saying?
They shouldn't be.
Right.
What I'm saying is everybody, because of the pandemic, they're in crisis management all the time.
Right.
That has to stop. Somebody's got to be smart at some point in time.
You would figure and I've been involved in the plannings of these types of events for over 20 years. And to fathom that communities can't pivot to a recovery is beyond me today.
You're right. I mean, there it is again. They just don't want to. I hate to say that word they because I don't know.
Right.
But the responsible people are the government. And that's bottom line.
That's it. That's all. Bonus. If you enjoyed this podcast, download, press subscribe, or follow us right now. More great content is on the way. Talk to you soon.
The That's It, That's All podcast is produced by Shawn Gumataotao. Executive producer is Trisha Gumataotao. Hit the subscribe or follow button and leave a review. Thanks for listening.